We've learned a lot about how reinforcement affects behavior, but what about punishment? It turns out that the impact of punishment is much less predictable than the impact of reinforcement. We don't get nice, neat schedules of punishment like we do with reinforcement. Why does that happen? There are a number of reasons. The first is that it suppresses the undesired behavior rather than getting rid of it. In other words, it doesn't teach you not to do something, it teaches you not to get caught. Think about how many people happily drive over the speed limit all the time, but they slow down as soon as they see a cop. Second, punishment by itself doesn't teach new behaviors. If I were to return a paper with a grade of C and not tell the student why they got that C, how can they be expected to learn to do better next time? Third, punishment can have undesirable consequences. If an employer's main interactions with employees consist of yelling at them, then this isn't going to bode well for workplace morale. If a child is harshly punished by a parent, then instead of changing their behavior, they may just learn that adults don't care or that adults should be feared. Finally, punishment may, and I stress the word may here, model inappropriate behaviors. You've all probably seen a parent who hits a child as punishment for physical aggression. So the lesson there is, hitting people is wrong, and to prove it, I'm going to hit you. Not exactly what we want kids to imitate. Just to be clear, I'm not saying here that punishment is always problematic. There are absolutely times in life where it's necessary, and there are some ways to make it more effective. First, as much as you can, try to state rules clearly in advance. Obviously, we can't always do this. For example, a person might not know that they will hate the taste of a new food until after they try it. But if you're looking to change your kids' behavior or your employees' behavior, then it helps if you can clearly tell them the rules beforehand. More importantly, tell them what they should do, not just what they shouldn't do. I have a friend who once yelled at her kid for coloring on the walls. A couple of days later, he came to her and he said, "Mommy, look what I did." He was so proud of himself because he'd colored all over the floor with marker, but very carefully not touched the walls. Not exactly the behavior she was looking for. So instead of "don't color on the walls," a better rule might have been "we only color on paper," or "only use markers when an adult is with you." Second, don't lash out in anger. This just makes the punishment seem more arbitrary and will make the person angry at you rather more so than thinking about the rules. Finally, make sure that the reinforcement outweighs the punishment. In other words, notice when people are doing what you want them to do and reinforce it. For example, with my kid, I might say, "Oh, Lily, I'm so proud of you for sharing your toys so nicely." With an older kid, you wouldn't use that tone of voice, obviously, but you might say, "Wow, it's been a really hard week and you really helped out, and I just want you to know that I appreciate it." This is one reason why it can be very helpful for workplaces to have things like Employee of the Month awards, especially if the word actually means something. For example, at my husband's workplace, his boss can give a time off award where he might get an extra couple hours of paid leave. That's peanuts in terms of the organization's overall budget, but it allows the boss to show tangible appreciation. To sum up, there are two main things that you should remember about punishment when you leave this class. One is that the impact of punishment is nowhere near as predictable as the impact of reinforcement. And the other is that punishment by itself tends not to be effective for long-term behavior change. Instead, you're better off with reinforcement alone or with a combination of punishment and reinforcement.